I call the honourable member Richard Prosser.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, I find myself again in the position of agreeing with quite a lot of what is being said on the other side of the House, and yet disagreeing with what they propose to do about it. New Zealand First is opposed to the passage of this bill in its present form. If the bill does make it through to Select Committee, we will certainly relish the opportunity to tear it to pieces there, as I'm sure other members on this side of the House will do. I think in actual fact there could be some good may come of having the various provisions of the bill, the proposals put forward to public scrutiny, and a further opportunity for some of Fonterra's own farmer shareholders to make submissions, because it is apparent that despite what the board has been telling us, has been telling the nation and telling politicians about support that existed previously at around the 80 and 90% level for the TAF scheme particularly, that support was given on the basis that farmers giving that support were given an assurance that the shareholders would retain 100% ownership and control of Fonterra the cooperative. And now it appears that the rules, which have not even been finalised as yet, may be pointing away from that, and that the way in which the share issue, particularly the units attached to them, may be traded, will in actual fact have the opposite effect, and that it will not be possible to deliver 100% ownership and control. Now, Mr Speaker, New Zealand First believes that it is vital that this industry, which is an enormous part of our overall economy, stays entirely within the ownership and control of New Zealand and New Zealanders and the farmer shareholders who have built this industry. We are, as a nation, as everybody is aware, we dominate the world export trade in the dairy industry. We supply something like 95% of the milk and milk products which are traded internationally. And on that, because of that, I think we've allowed ourselves to believe in New Zealand that we are significant as a player in the world dairy market. And in actual fact, that's not the case. New Zealand produces something like 3% of the world's milk. So although we produce 95% of exports, those exports are very insignificant in terms of world production. Fonterra might be the 9th biggest dairy company in the world, but it's less than half the size of the 8th biggest. We are a minnow in terms of overall production, and there are dairy companies out there who could swallow... There are dairy companies out there in the world who could swallow the entirety of New Zealand's economy, never mind the dairy industry, and given the chance to do so, they will do just that. But it is vital that New Zealand's dairy exports continue to grow, and it's vital for the simple reason that eventually this bubble that we're experiencing at the moment is going to burst. And it's going to burst partly because of Fonterra's own success in growing itself as an export business. There will come a point where the markets that we currently supply with bulk commodities from New Zealand are supplied from the farms that Fonterra itself is developing in those overseas markets. So when those markets can be supplied from those markets, what Fonterra, the cooperative, will have to do is rely on what are currently its highest valued sectors of its business, that being its brands and its high value ingredients. And to do that, we are told Fonterra needs to have more money available to grow that side of the business. This we can accept. And this is what TAF was sold to the farmers on the basis of. And if TAF could be constructed in such a way that it did guarantee that 100% ownership and control remained with the farmer shareholders, it would be a good thing. But it seems that it cannot. And the whole point about share trading is that it doesn't do anything to ensure that more milk solids are produced in New Zealand. When people start trading in the units, the securities that are attached to the dry shares, what they're going to be making their money out of is not producing milk and selling milk products. They're going to be making money out of buying and selling shares. This gets away from the entire purpose of the dairy industry, which has been, as it has been built up for 150 years in New Zealand by New Zealand farmers, to produce milk solids, to produce the best quality dairy products in the world, and to sell them to the world. What the scheme will do if it goes through will be to move that focus away from that, to make that a secondary business almost, to put farmers in the position of becoming first tenant farmers and then peasant farmers as they rely solely on a milk price, which is determined by the other major aspect of this bill. And the profits will be made by trading in shares from foreigners. Mr Speaker, we oppose this bill for the same reasons that the Shareholders' Council have chosen to oppose it, and that it is not what the farmers were sold and voted on originally. Farmers were guaranteed 100% ownership and control, and that's not now deliverable. We believe that should be put to another vote, and we wonder why the board of Fonterra appears to be set against the idea of there being another vote amongst shareholders. We believe that may be because they also suspect that sentiment may be rising against it. It's worth noting, I think, Mr Speaker, that this bill, although it permits Fonterra to instigate the Trading Among Farmers scheme at a point of its choosing up until 2013, it doesn't actually put any regulations in place around how that trading scheme should function. And while we are very concerned that while those details are still being worked out, this is not something that Fonterra should be allowed to do arbitrarily. It's like giving them a blank cheque, particularly when there seems to be some discrepancy between the understanding of the system and the motivations between the Shareholders' Council and the board. There are other ways for Fonterra to raise capital if it needs to. It has a AA+ credit rating and could borrow money on any of the world's commercial markets at extremely competitive rates. Fonterra could continue to retain dividends from shareholders. In actual fact, anything that Fonterra does other than issue more shares in itself is going to cost the farmers in retention term one way or another, whether it's direct or whether they're paying back debt. There is not currently a redemption risk, as the proponents of this part of the bill claim. The redemption has only occurred twice in the history of Fonterra, but if there's one thing that's going to create a redemption risk, it will be trading amongst farmers, because it will artificially raise the share price. The first thing that will happen once shares start being traded is that it will increase in value. That will increase the motivation for some farmers to quit the business and take the money. And once the value of those shares goes up, it will make it much more difficult for new farmers, for young farmers, to get into the industry. And it opens the door for outside influence and control, as other members have said. If there are no restrictions, and there appear to be no restrictions, on who may or may not purchase or the units attached to dry shares, then the people who will buy them will be the ones with the money, and that is going to be the foreigners. It is, as the member from the Greens alluded to, it is a partial float in all but name, and it has already been rejected by farmers for good reason. There is no purpose to the unit securities other than to facilitate trading, which has no connection to milk solids. And we note also that the Shareholders' Council have raised some questions as to the maybe potential conflicts of interest between the Due Diligence Legal Committee provider and some of the board members. For all these reasons, Mr Speaker, we feel there is not sufficient good in this bill to let it go through to Select Committee. If it does, we look forward to, as I say, examining it closer there, and perhaps in the light of public scrutiny, it may not even survive. New Zealand First is opposed to this bill. Thank you.
Colin King.
Thank you very much.